Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice podcast. The Heart of Hospice podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This special episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast is being sponsored by the Death Deck, featuring the End of Life Deck. The End of Life Deck is used by many healthcare providers as a casual way to help start conversations about end-of-life wishes. It helps people communicate what matters most to them. To learn more about the EOL deck, visit thedeathdeck.com.
Today's episode is the final episode of our 4-part special series featuring hospice educator Barbara Karnes. For over 40 years, Barbara Karnes has worked in hospice and end-of-life care, educating and supporting both end-of-life workers and caregivers providing support for someone with a serious illness. Barbara is the author of Gone From My Sight, a resource known as the Little Blue Book, an industry standard for explaining the death and dying process that has sold over 40 million copies. Barbara's the expert that end-of-life workers go to for information, answers, and encouragement. You can find all of Barbara's resources and her writing at bkbooks.com. In today's interview, Barbara shares the very personal story of her husband's end-of-life journey and death. Her hospice experience taught her some lessons that she shares in our conversation. She opens up about her feelings of anger and frustration and guilt and grief. One of the lessons Barbara learned from her grief after Jack's death was the difference between living as a we and living as a me after 60-plus years of marriage. Barbara's story is one that so many can relate to. I hope you find comfort and hope in today's conversation. There's a lot to learn. Barbara, welcome back. This is our last one for our series. I'm so excited to have you with me.
This has been a really not just cool experience doing these. It really has been meaningful, I think, not just to you and I, but hopefully to everyone who hears it. I think we might be doing some good work.
I hope so. It feels like it. So we're going to push in today. We've got something a little bit different today, moving forward into some personal experiences of yours with end-of-life care. But to get us started, we will go ahead and do our end-of-life deck card, one of my favorite things. So here's your question. When I can no longer tell you what I want to hear, please play A, my all-time favorite music playlist, B, audiobooks or inspirational words, or C, the sound of the ocean or the river with a bedpan nearby.
Well, how about some Chris Stapleton, some Rod Stewart, some Barbara Streisand, Neil Diamond? You can tell how old I am just from my playlist.
Although
But
I don't think Chris Stapleton is old.
no, he's my new one. He's my latest. I saw him in concert, which is cool. I've seen most of my favorites in concert, so added him to it. But yeah, let's play those in the background.
I like that. So it's an eclectic mix. Very nice. Very nice. Okay. So we're going to dive in a little bit deeper for you personally. You've been doing this work in end-of-life care, supporting caregivers and end-of-life workers for a very long time, over 40 years. And you are our go-to person. Definitely. And almost a year ago, actually it was just over a year ago, you had a personal hospice experience of your own with the loss of your husband, Jack. And first, I want to thank you for letting me talk with you about this, Barbara, because I realize it's only been just over the year, and this is a very personal experience. And for you to allow us to peek inside your private life is a big privilege for us. So will you share your experience with Jack with me, please?
Yes. So a little background first. Yes.
Yes.
This is a cool story. I think I've got time. I was a senior in high school, 17 years old, and went to a dance hall that was really for 21 and over. And I am sitting there, and he had just sold a house. He was 24, and he came into the dance hall kind of to celebrate that he sold this house. And he came over and asked me to dance, and we spent the rest of the evening talking. Now, here's the kind of, he didn't know. I kind of led him to believe, let's put it that way, that I was a nurse working at a local hospital. And when in reality, I was a nurse's aide working on weekends. But, so he figured if I'm a nurse, I've got to be over 21, and I'm in a 21-year place.
Barbara.
I know. So we started dating. And when my mother found out that he was 24, she said, "What does a 24-year-old want to go out with you for?" And well, he doesn't really know. And she said, "Well, I'm going to be at the door, and if I don't like him, I'm going to tell him how old you are." So I'm hiding in the bedroom, shaking when he rings the doorbell. And he's such a, you notice I said he was such a charmer that she loved him right away. She let me go out with him. So to follow that up real quick, about 4 or 5 months later, we've been going out every Friday night. I got my high school class ring, and I forgot to take it off. And we're at a dinner, out to dinner, and he said, "Oh, is that your class ring?" And I thought, oh boy, I'm in trouble. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, let me see it." And he looks at it and he says, 1959.
Barbara, you had been dating for 4 or 5 months? Oh, my word.
So I said, yeah, I'm 18. By then I was 18. Yeah, I'm 18. But he was hooked by then. And so we have, at the time of his death, we had known each other for 65 years. And we married 2 weeks after I graduated from nursing school. And so we'd been married, 61 years when he died. And both of us have always been healthy. And he went to the doctors for a yearly checkup, routine, chest x-ray, routine, cancer of the lung, and 4 months later, he was dead. Now, as he used to say, he was in his 90th year. 90 meant something to him. Most of us would not jump ahead, but he was 89, and we decided anything invasive was not worth doing. And so even to find out what kind of cancer of the lung he had, we did not go for that invasive treatment. So we knew he had cancer of the lung. We didn't know how advanced it was. And that was a really hard part. I wouldn't do it over because I wouldn't want to do the invasive treatments or any treatments, but the invasive procedures. But it was hard and that's because of the knowledge I have. If I'd have known squamous cell, oat cell, I would have had a time frame.
Right.
And I didn't. So hoping that he had at least a year, he wanted to live to the election. He wanted to know how that unfolds. And it was 4 months. He didn't make it.
So as a nurse, for you to see Jack make the choice not to have any testing done, no biopsy, no bronchoscopy, no PET scans, were you comfortable with that decision? How did that sit with you?
Really, it was my decision. I told him, you don't want to do this. Based on my knowledge and his age, there was nothing to be gained by any kind of treatment. And there was nothing to be gained by doing all the invasive procedures to find out what it was. It was my end of life knowledge that led me to discuss with him why he didn't want to have all that done. So it was really my decision.
Yeah. Jack used you as a resource and he relied on you.
Yes, he did.
You were his hospice nurse, basically.
I was.
So Jack had hospice at home, not for a year, not an extended period of time, just for a few weeks, actually. What did you find most difficult about having a hospice team to come into your home and care for you and care for Jack?
The system to bring a patient on was an eye-opener for me because it's changed since I did it. I mean, as before, as a nurse, primary care nurse, I did the admission. And I learned then that it's baby duck bonding. Whoever walks in that door, the very first person that the family sees, that's the one. That's who they bond with. So hospice comes in. It was Memorial Weekend that he took a turn, like on Thursday. I called the doctor. It's time for hospice. And she got the referral. And Friday, the hospice called and said, we've got the referral. But it's Memorial Weekend, so we won't be there until Tuesday. That was not acceptable. And that's what happened. But I find that when someone, and this is what I learned by me, when you call for a hospice referral, you really needed it weeks before you have the courage to call. And you want someone right then. So within 24 hours, whether it's weekend or holidays, you go out and you bring that person on. So an admission team comes, lovely social worker, nurse. Their job is to do all the paperwork and bring us on service. And then tomorrow, your primary care nurse will come and visit.
Okay.
Well, baby duck bonding, I don't, as lovely as the admission team was, to me, that was a waste of time. A waste of an opportunity for me to bond and develop a relationship with my hospice nurse, who is the key person in hospice care. So I believe that it is not how business is done nowadays, but for the family and the caregiver, you want to send the primary care nurse within 24 hours of a referral, and care begins. I think that's really, really important. And notice I use the word primary care nurse. You have one nurse forever. You don't send a different nurse every time. How can you have a bond with anyone if it's 1 hour visit? So that was my hospice beginning experience. And like 3 months later, he was dead.
So you have to know that if you had called me and said, Helen, what can I expect from this? I would have told you within 24 hours, that hospice would have a nurse in your house. I think that's very unusual. And it may have had something to do with the holiday weekend, which shame on them. That should never happen. Or it had to do with staffing, which is really a newer thing here in the United States, that we are short-staffed enough that patients get delayed because the hospice agency can't get to them. But I agree with what you're saying. Most of the time when people call and say, we're ready for hospice and it's time now, it's already been a couple of weeks longer than it should have been. Yeah, I think that's a pretty common experience. So you were Jack's primary caregiver. You were administering the meds. Who else was there in the house with you at the bedside?
My girls, and I have 2 girls and a son and a daughter-in-law who is like one of my girls. And they were here starting probably in the beginning of September, and he died the 18th of September. There was someone here every day, and they read to him. They slept. Once he moved into a hospital bed, they slept in the room. So they were my support. And as a caregiver, I did, and I'm guessing a lot of caregivers kind of go on automatic pilot. You just do whatever needs to be done that comes in front of you.
Right.
So to have a support team who can think ahead of what you need, who can be there to just to talk to. I thought of what caregivers who are alone without the kind of support system that I have, how really, really challenging it is for them. And I'm not saying it was easy for me or any of us, and it will never be easy for someone we care about to be approaching death. Right. That's hard work. But to do it all alone is even harder.
What did you do to take care of yourself, if anything, while Jack was dying and the kids were there at the bedside with you?
They actually made sure that I slept all night. They took turns being with him so that I could sleep all night. That was a really important part of the support they gave. One day after hospice was on, I was having a really, really hard time with Jack. I was mad at him and didn't like what he'd just done, and called the social worker, hospice social worker. And she came over, and that way I didn't have to vent to my girls. And I could say anything I wanted without thinking of someone else's feelings. And we sat upstairs, and I ranted and raved and cried, and she listened. There wasn't anything she could say, but she listened, and she was there. That was a good way of me taking care of myself.
Absolutely. I love it that you called the social worker to be able to unload that, to offload that part of your grief that included the anger. And it's interesting that you bring this up, because if you look at the way people die in the movies and TV, it's all deathbed reconciliations and everybody's saying the I love yous and I forgive yous, when in reality, that's not always how it works. We might not even like the person who's dying. There may be major history between your person and you. So sometimes there's conflict, even as someone is dying. I think that's a pretty common situation, just like what you experienced.
Well, and I think it's very common because you're under stress, you're grieving from the moment of diagnosis, you're grieving. So your emotions are at the surface. And at least with Jack, he was doing life review, which he would come in at night, this is before hospice, and sit and talk about his college days. And during those 4 months, there were times I was very irritated with him. Like, I don't want to hear about your college. I want to go to sleep. It's 10:30 at night.
So he needed to talk and you needed to sleep.
Yeah. I mean, and life isn't perfect. But when you're under stress, the good times often aren't as recognizable as the difficult times. And I'm making probably a generalized statement. Maybe that's just me, but I have a feeling that I'm not the only one that had to deal with the negative thoughts and emotions that came up. The anger I had at him for dying, for being sick, for being irritable, for not eating.
Yeah.
And then it's the feeling of, oh, Barbara, you are such a bad person for feeling all this.
Yeah, the guilt.
I'm no different than anyone else. This is typical caregiver and patient interaction.
Absolutely. Barbara has more to share before this episode's over, so keep listening.
This special episode is made possible by our friends at the Death Deck. The Death Deck has created a new tool they call the End of Life Deck, or EOL Deck. The EOL Deck can be used by families, caregivers, and healthcare providers to help facilitate conversations about end-of-life wishes. Using multiple choice and open-ended questions, the EOL Deck has a casual tone that makes starting conversations about what matters most a little easier. Here's hospice nurse Helen Bauer from Hospice Navigation Services sharing the value of the EOL Deck.
The EOL Deck jumpstarts the conversations we all need to have with finesse, compassion, and honesty. It treats end-of-life discussions with thoughtfulness and respect. Every end-of-life worker should have a deck.
To learn more about the EOL deck and to purchase this helpful conversation starter, just visit thedeathdeck.com.
Barbara, can we talk about the eating thing? You have a brand new booklet about feeding, nutrition at the end of life, because this is such a sticking point. It's emotionally charged for caregivers and patients. There's guilt, there's force feeding, there's a lot that goes into it. People consider tube feedings to try to prolong or improve whatever they can. So it's a big issue, and you address it in the new booklet that you have. So can you talk about how you and Jack related to each other over that particular topic?
Well, actually, the reason I wrote the book is because I had such a hard time with food, and I knew better. I knew all the things about not eating, and I knew it. But if my husband didn't eat, he was going to die.
Yeah.
And from the moment of diagnosis, it was to take this thin man and make sure he didn't get thinner, because he needed every ounce that was on his body. And that became paramount in my caregiving. Food, get the food down him. And he would eat less and less, and I would make more and more, give it to him more and more frequently, because he had to eat to live. And one day, he got mad at me, and it was tense over food for quite a while, because he'd say, I can't eat, I don't want to eat. And I'd say, you have to. And so he would a little. And one day he pointed at me and he said, get out. And it was over food. And I was in the hall, I was crying. And I realized I'm trying to keep this man alive, and his body is trying to die. This is the future. He is going to die. You can't keep him alive, let alone by feeding him. And so then I was always offer, never force. And the booklet came out of that intensity, because I knew I wasn't the only one.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen that tons of times. And what a hard way to learn, right?
But it shows that it isn't enough to have knowledge, that emotions affect how we perceive and interact with and deal with the knowledge that is presented to us.
Yeah, your hospice nurse brain kicked off.
Oh,
That was all
yeah.
heart. That was Jack's wife that was kicking up such a fuss.
Exactly. If he didn't eat, that's what I was supposed to do. For 61 years, I fed him.
Yeah, it's your job. You're his partner.
That was my job. And it was very challenging.
I can imagine. There's so much emotion that goes into that.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's denial, postponement. Because in reality, you knew the diagnosis was there, and you knew that he was on a trajectory that would result in his death. But there's a little bit of part of you that thinks we can prolong some things and give him some time if he'll just eat.
Exactly. Not knowing the diagnosis,
Right.
not knowing the kind, I'm thinking, hey, he could have 18 months. He could make it till the election. That's a possibility. But I got to keep feeding him. He's got to eat if he's going to live that long.
Right.
But he didn't, and it was because of the kind that he had that was the short acting kind.
Right. So when you think back on your experience as Jack's caregiver, when he was going through all this, what would you do differently?
I would have spent more time with him. I was so busy taking care of him, of taking care of my family and feelings. And I was busy, busy, busy. And I didn't sit down with him and just sit with him. Our kids did. Jay read to him, Joey read to him. They'd read to him for hours. And I'd come in and I'd sit on the end of his bed, maybe 10 minutes, and then I was gone, off to do something. That's my biggest regret. I should have been able to just be, and I wasn't. He would come in, and this is probably a little, well, it's personal, but that's okay. We slept in different beds, same area, but different beds. And at night, when he was up and about and still driving and all of that, he would come in at bedtime. I'd be with my book reading in bed. And he'd sit on the chair at the end of the bed and talk to me about college and all of his reviews. And then he would get up and come over and crawl in bed with me. And I would move over. But there was a part of me that went, really? It's bedtime? You want to just lay here and I'm uncomfortable? And I feel bad about those thoughts.
Thank you for being so honest about these things. These are hard things, but I think so many caregivers go through similar situations. So now, Barbara, tell me something that you got really right when it came to caring for Jack as he was dying.
I got everyone here in the couple of days before he died. And I mean from out of family, from out of town, everyone here. And I gave everyone an opportunity to go in alone and talk with him. He was non-responsive a lot of the time, but everyone had that opportunity. And I think that was really good work. And everyone was able to say their goodbyes. Then we all sat around his bed and held each other's hands and held him and had hands on his foot, and did a vigil until he stopped breathing. And it was beautiful. He did a great job. And it allowed everyone there to take this experience and memory with them forever, for when it's my turn, when it's their parents' turn, whenever. So a seed was planted. And the other really, really good thing that I did, that I hold probably more in my heart than anything else that I did, was we have had a tradition forever in what we call the Karnes goodbye. And if my kids are leaving, if friends are leaving, we stand on the front porch and wave until the car is out of sight. And we gave Jack the Karnes goodbye. All the family stood on the porch and waved until that station wagon was out of sight. That was good. That was really good.
What an incredible legacy that you have created through Jack's death and how you handled it for your grandkids and your kids. You once told me that knowing about grief and grieving are two different things. Knowing about grief and grieving are two different things. What does that mean for you?
It was a real eye-opener because I have learned from this experience that there's different kinds of grieving. And intellectually, I knew grieve a loss of a job, a move, all that. No, let's take it even further. There's grief for a child. There is grief for a brother or a sister. There is grief for a mother or father. And there is grief for a partner. And they all present different feelings and work through differently. I didn't know that. Grief for a partner, and it applies to the others kinds of grief also, but I think in a bigger area for a partner, and that is learning how to go from being a we in all your thinking, we are going to eat, we are going to bed, we are watching TV, to being a me. I want to have this for dinner. I want to go to bed at this time. I am going to watch this TV show. I have always been a we. And I think because I've never been a me, that aspect of grief was such a realization. And it's something I had never picked up in all my knowledge of grief. That didn't occur to me. How, I had a guy, bless his heart, elder gentleman, wife's upstairs, dead. We're waiting for the funeral home, and he's crying, and I'm sitting there with my arm around him, and he's saying, I don't know how I'm going to live without her. I just don't know how I'm going to live without her. And I'm being supportive. And he goes, no, you don't understand. I don't know how to cook. I don't know how to wash my clothes. And I didn't understand until now.
Yeah, you lose that part of your identity. How am I supposed to be myself when I'm not going to be myself anymore?
And how am I going to do all this? How am I going to get the house painted? How am I going to pay my taxes?
Yeah. How do I function?
Yes. What do people do who don't have the family support that I have? The widow or widower, the family's all out of town or not supportive or don't have a family.
Right.
How do they learn how to be a me, how to live, how to cook?
Yeah. It's a very real challenge, very real challenge. And until you go through it, do you really know? Yeah.
No.
So how has working inside end-of-life care impacted the way you grieve, your grief style?
I am a mental person. I that's where I live, is on the mental level. I'm not real good dealing with emotions. You bring it up to the mental and you think it through rather than feel it.
Right.
So I think that has been the biggest realization in this grief adventure that I'm on, is to acknowledge feelings. And my end-of-life knowledge and what I've taught others is all about feelings and all that. I just didn't do it myself. I didn't practice what I preach. And so that I suppose is the biggest insight I'm pulling from the knowledge that I have into what I'm experiencing.
Yeah, you're more cerebral, and in this experience, it's all heart, all heart. Yeah. Okay, so Barbara, there are a lot of people working in end-of-life care all over the country that are also dealing with their own personal losses, whatever loss that may be. So personal grief, along with the grief that they accumulate, secondary grief that they accumulate through working with the dying. What would you tell an end-of-life worker who's also experiencing personal grief?
It's very important that they do not return to work too soon. If a partner, if someone close, whether parent, child, partner, dies, I believe that a healthcare worker does not return to work within a couple weeks. I would like to see months, depending upon how that grief is being dealt with, maybe even a year, because grief is like a scar. It's a huge wound, and the wound covers over, but the scar will always be there. And if you return to end-of-life work too soon, the scar, the wound hasn't even had time to create a scar. And every time you experience a death, your own pain is going to come forward. And you can't stay in this work with that. So, yes, most of us have to work, have to have a job, but it doesn't have to be direct patient care. And so if you experience, and you're a healthcare worker and you a hospice worker, and you have a close death to you, then see if you can work in the office. Take as much time off as you can, but find something to do in the office. Do not do direct patient care until that wound has healed over and created its scar.
Yeah. Good advice. Good advice for our leadership and who work in hospice as well. Barbara, where can listeners connect with you, find your all your resources, your blog, your wonderful booklets? How can they find you?
bkbooks.com is my website. I write weekly blogs. Sign up for from the website. Sign up for the blog delivery. You get an email once a week. All my materials there. Read what they cover. The website has it all. You can always call the office to place an order, or via the website, or from any book, whatever. But your information resource is bkbooks.com.
Perfect. Barbara, as always, thank you so much. Thank you for this heart story that you shared with us today. I'm so honored that you had this conversation with me.
Thank you. It was good for me to verbalize. That was healing for me. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell my story and know that my story will help others. And you've given me that opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes, and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.